Hello everyone and welcome to another flow along video, a YouTube series dedicated to complete flow beginners. In the first few episodes of this series, we've created your first ever flow, and we also looked into the decision elements. So hopefully by now you're getting a little bit more comfortable with flows in Salesforce. In today's video, I want to start looking at screen flows. Screen flows are super powerful, and the main difference between a screen flow and a record trigger flow is that for a screen flow, we give the user the opportunity to enter some data. So a screen flow requires the user to enter some inputs to then do something else. So we are able to capture some information before we take the next action. For example, in a record trigger flow, you can enter a criteria, and if that criteria is met, the flow can do something like, for example, create a new record. But you predefine the values of the record you're creating. Or you can use other dynamic ways to kind of get the right value for those fields. But in a screen flow, you let the end user input those values. Now, obviously, you have control of what you show and what you don't show to the end user. And all of that is controlled within a screen element within your flow. So I want to start by taking a look at this new concept of screen flows. In today's video, we are going to be creating a screen flow. So this is just a quick reminder that this is a build along series, hence the name. And so by now you should have your Trailhead Playground tab open on one side of your screen, and then this video open on the other side of your screen. Okay, so here we are in Salesforce, and I want to start by demonstrating the difference between a screen flow that is embedded in your Lightning record page and a screen flow that is launched by a quick action. The reason for this is because unlike our record trigger flow, we actually need to trigger our screen flow in a certain way. Now, the two most common ways that we can trigger this screen flow is either by embedding the flow directly on the Lightning record page or launching the screen flow through a quick action. So here on the right-hand side, I've created a sample of what the flow looks like when it's embedded on the Lightning record page. And we can see here that I've added a message that says, this is a sample of what a screen flow looks like when it's embedded onto the Lightning record page. The flow doesn't do anything, so if we click finish, it's just going to reload to the same page, but that is essentially our screen flow. It is a flow that has a screen, and we're displaying that on the Lightning record page. Now, just below that, we actually have another sample of a screen flow that this time it captures some fields. So there's a heading, it says contact, then there's a first name, last name, and email address. Now, this is essentially a screen flow. We allow the end user to enter some input, to enter some data onto our fields before we actually perform an automation. So this is an example of what a screen flow looks like embedded on the Lightning record page. On the other hand, however, we can have a flow that is launched through a quick action. So quick actions are these buttons here on the right-hand side of our Lightning record page. And so I've labeled this one quick action. And if we click there, we can see that another screen pops up and it tells us that this is a sample of what a screen flow looks like when it's launched from a quick action. So this is essentially the difference. The embedded on the Lightning record page, the user has direct access to that. It's always on the page. And of course, you can put that within a tab component. You can do all kinds of things. And then on the other hand, we have a quick action whereby the user needs to click on a button to launch that flow. So these are the two common ways that you can launch screen flows. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start creating our screen flow, and we're going to launch it from both ways so that you can see the difference. And in this video, we're just going to do something very basic. And then in the next video and the video after that, we're going to start building on that so we can get a little bit more complex, but not everything in one go. Okay, so before we move to the flow builder, let's have a look at our use case. And as I said, it's going to be something really, really simple. So what we want to do is we want to have a screen flow that when we launch it, it will display the account name from the record that we launched it from. So if this is the account that we're going to launch the flow from, then I want to be able to see a screen that shows me the name of the account. In this case, Burlington Textiles Corp of America. Not the easiest name, but let's go with it. So if we look at Lucidchart, you can see that it's a very simple flow for now. We're going to start the flow. We're going to get the account record, and then we're going to store all the account record fields into variables, and Salesforce will do that for us automatically. And then we're going to display the account name on the screen, and that's it. And then our flow is going to end. So let's move on to the flow builder. We want to go to setup, click flows, and then click new flow. Now, obviously, because we're making a screen flow, we want to select the screen flow type and then click create. So in here, the first thing that you notice is that the start element has no options for us to do anything. So we need to start our flow with an element. So we're going to go ahead and add a get element because we want to fetch the account record that the flow is launched from. So here we're going to call this get account. And then for object, we're going to select account. Now we need to add a filter so that the element knows which account we want it to fetch. Otherwise, it's not going to know. And so a very standard way of doing this is selecting the ID field of the object, so account ID. And for value, what we do is we create a new variable resource with a very specific name. And so we click on value, we click on new resource, and here we want to create a variable. Now for the API name, you want to type in record with no capitals, and then capital I and lower capital D. So record ID, where only the I from ID is capital. Pay attention to this. It needs to be in this format. So now that we've done this, we can leave the data type as text, but we do want to check the available for input option. And I'll explain why later in the video. So we go ahead and click done. At the moment, what this element is doing is it's going to get the account record that the flow was launched from. Now, I do understand that this whole concept of selecting the ID field and then creating a variable called record ID might be a little bit confusing. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a separate video where I explain just this in its own. And we can go through some examples just to make it a little bit easier. When that video is ready, I'll put a link to it in the description of this video. But for now, just take my word that this is what will happen. This setup here that we've just done is going to fetch the record that we launched the flow from, so long as it's an account record. Okay, so now that we've done this, what we want to do is we want to click on the plus icon to add another element, and we want to click on the screen element this time. Now, this is what the screen element looks like. It's a little bit overwhelming, but don't worry. We're going to be ignoring a lot of it for now, and then slowly we'll be discovering all of the other functions that this offers us. But for now, I just want you to pay attention to the right-hand side of this page. You see that we have screen properties, and so just like any other element, we need to give this a label, an API name, and optionally a description. So for label, I'm going to call this main screen. And then you see that the API name will auto-populate. Now we do have some other options here. We can configure the header. And so here we can show or hide the header. And you can see here flow label is our header. So if I untick this, that header goes away. We can also show help text. And then you can add a help text here. Now for now, what we're going to do is just untick both of these. We don't really need them. The other option that we have is to configure the footer. Now here, this is quite interesting. We have essentially 4 options. So we have an option for next or finish button, the previous button, the pause button, and then pause configuration message. Now, straight up, we're not going to be using pause. So we can hide pause, and that hides the pause message as well. And you can see that that made that little button here on the left-hand side disappear. If I just show that again, there's that pause button here, and then we're just going to hide it, and that will disappear. We don't want to be pausing the flow. And now you do have a previous and a finish or next button. So the way that this works is with next or finish, they kind of share the same button. So if you have more than one screen on your flow, then let's say you have two screens on your flow, the first screen will say next, and then the final screen will say finish. Another thing you can do is you can add a previous button, and that allows the user to go back to the previous screen. If your flow only has one screen, then this button is useless. And so our flow for now is only going to have one screen, so we can hide the previous button as well. So we just have the next or finish button available, and we're going to leave that as its standard label, but you can add a custom one. So if you click use a custom label, you can just enter a text value here. We're just going to leave it as the standard one. It's fine. So now that our screen is set up, we now want to pay attention to the left-hand side of our page where we have components and fields. We'll start with components. Components is really straightforward. They're just components that you drag and drop into your screen. Now, our screen is the center of the page. So say I wanted to drag a date field onto my screen flow. I can search for the date component and I can drag and drop onto my screen. And when I let that go, that component becomes available within my screen. Now you notice that every component has a panel on the right-hand side. So every component will need a label, an API name. Now components have settings or options, if you will. Different components will have different options available to you. So it's always important that you review these options to make sure your component works the way that you want them to. So a good example here is if I search for text to look for a display text component. Display text component is really easy. It just displays some text. There's nothing else to it. So I'm going to get rid of that date component so we don't get confused. And I've just dragged and dropped this display text component onto our screen flow. So on the right hand side, I now have a display text panel, and I'm going to give it an API name. I'm going to call it dtext welcome, because this is going to be our welcome text. And then on this editor here, I can now add the display text that I want to display. So for example, I can say, welcome to my first screen flow. Please see below the name of this account. So I can say something like this. And now, because this is just text and I have an editor, it means that I can select my text and I can edit in different ways. So I can increase the font size. I could add a center alignment to the text. I can make it bold if I wanted to. So there are different things that you can do here. But long story short, this is just text. It doesn't do anything. It just displays text to the end user. So here we have our first component on our screen flow. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to display the account name when we launch this flow. And so what I can do is I can search for a text component, because account names are also just text. And I can drag and drop that into my flow. And then on the right-hand side, you can see that we have a text panel now. So we're going to give this a name, and we're going to call it account name. Now for API name, I don't want this to get confusing with actual reference to the record itself. So I like to add a prefix. I'll call this text underscore and then account name. So I know that this particular API refers to a screen component and not a field within an object. Now here you can see that I can add it as required or not. Do I want to make this field required? Yes, no. Do I want to make it read-only? Do I want to disable the field? We're not going to get too much into that because that's a little bit too complex for now. We want to keep it really simple, but we can also add a default value. Now a default value is basically the value that this field will be pre-populated with when you launch the flow. And we do want to add one. Why? Because the whole point of our flow is that when we launch the flow, we can see the account name of the account record we launched the flow from. And so we do need to pre-populate this text component with a value. And the value should be the account name. And so if we click on default value, we're able to select the resource. Now, because our previous element is getting the account record, we can reference that variable, and then within that, we can search for the account name. So here it is, get account name. And now this should pre-populate our text component with the account name. So what we want to do here is just click done. Remember to click done. Don't X out of this screen, otherwise you're going to lose all your work. Make sure that you click done on the bottom right. And so now we can save our flow. So we go ahead and we use the same naming convention that we've learned in the previous videos. We call this account because that's the object name, and then screen flow because that's the type of flow that we're making, and then what the flow is doing. So account name display. Now we add a description. So this flow is launched from the account object and it displays the account name. Okay, now we can hit save. And before we activate this flow, this is a great example of us trying out the debug feature within the flow. So a debug feature allows you to debug your flow before you activate it. It gives you a really helpful guidance on every step that the flow took along the way. So it also helps you understand the flow a little bit better. So to do that, we can just hit debug here on the top right, and then this will ask us to input the record ID. Now again, this is that record ID that we talked about earlier in the video. So if you're still confused about record ID, make sure you stay tuned for my next video where I go over record IDs, how they work, what they are, and why they're so important. But for now, this is what we want to do. We want to go back to Salesforce and we want to copy the record ID of the account record we're working with. So here's our account record. So if you look at your URL, you can see that this account record has an ID. That's this value here. So we want to copy that value. And then we want to go back to our debug and we want to paste that value into the record ID field. Now what we want to do is we want to hit run. And you see here that in the center of the screen, we have our screen flow. We can see our display text and we can see our text component is pre-populating with the account name. So fantastic, our flow is working. Now on the right-hand side, you actually have debug details, which is a breakdown of everything that has happened. You can see that the interview started from this user. This is the ID of my user, so yours will be different. And then the record ID is this one here, which is the one that we copied from the account record. Of course, this for you will also be different because record IDs are unique. Now, after that, what the flow did was that it got the account record. And it got an account record where the ID of the account record that it fetched was the same as the ID in the record ID variable, which we gave it, which was this value here. So you can see, if I copy, you can see that the value we've entered up here in orange is the same as the value of the account that the flow fetched for us in yellow. And that's why that was important. So it got that record, that was successful. You can see here it says results, successfully found records. And then what it did is it moved on to the screen component and it displayed the account name. So we know that our flow is working. So what we can do now is we can activate our flow. So we go ahead and hit activate. Now what we want to do is we want to create a quick action so we can launch our flow from the quick action. And we want to embed our flow onto the Lightning record page. And that way I can show you both of the two versions. So let's start with the quick action. The first thing we want to do is go to Object Manager and then go to Account. Within the account, we want to click on Buttons, Links, and Actions. And then we want to click on New Action. Now for action type, we want to select a flow. And then below that, we're now able to select the flow that we've created. Now, you're only going to see active flows in this list. So if you're looking for a flow and you can't find it, it's because your flow is not active. So make sure you activate it first. The flow that we want is called account screen flow account display name. We know that thanks to our very helpful naming convention. And now we can give our quick action a name. I'm going to call this display account name just to make it really, really simple. Now I'll hit save. So now that this is done, what I want to do is go back to the front end. I want to click on the cogwheel and edit my page. And what I want to do here is I want to embed that flow straight on the Lightning record page. And I also want to add the quick action to my dynamics component. So let's start with the quick action again. I'll click on my highlights component. Mine is dynamic. If yours isn't, there will be a pop-up here on the top right where you can upgrade to dynamic. I want to scroll down, click new action, and then here I want to select display account name. And then I just want to drag this to the top here just to make it easy for us to see. The other thing I want to do now is embed my flow onto the Lightning record page. So I'm going to get rid of that old flow we had. And then on the components on the left-hand side, I want to search for flow. And then I want to drag and drop this flow component anywhere on the page that you want. And then here, we want to make sure that the flow that's selected is the flow we've just created. So here I have account screen flow account name. Now here is the interesting bit. When you're embedding a flow directly on the Lightning record page, you have to manually pass the record ID into the variable. So you can see here that it says record ID, and this checkbox must be ticked because that way we can pass that record ID into our record ID variable, whereby our get elements will know which account record to fetch. We don't need to do this for quick actions. It does it automatically. But when you embed a flow on the Lightning record page, you need to make sure that this checkbox is ticked. So once you've made sure of that, let's go ahead and click save. And then let's have a look at our new and very first screen flow. Okay, so our changes have been saved. So we're going to go on the account record and we can see straight away that the embedded version of our screen flow is working. We have our display text and the account name is being pre-populated with the account name of this particular record. Just to triple check, I'm going to go back to account object. I'm going to click on another account and we can see that it does in fact pull the name of this record as well. So that's working really well. The next thing we want to do is check out our quick action. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our screen flow using the quick action we created called display account name. And we can see here that we have the same flow running. It's just being launched through a quick action. So the same thing is happening. We have our display text here, and then it populates with the account name. And just for my own sanity, I'm going to check another account record with that quick action. And yep, it seems to be working as expected. So really happy with that. Okay, so just to recap this video, we've created our very first, although extremely simple screen flow. We talked a little bit about record IDs and variables, but we're going to go into more detail on that on the next video, so stay tuned for that. And we've also learned the difference between launching a screen flow through embedding the screen flow directly on the Lightning record page and launching the screen flow from a quick action. So I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you have any questions or if you'd like to give me some feedback, please drop a comment down below. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.